All right, ever catch yourself thinking, there's a research paper in there somewhere, when you spot something out in the wild? Totally unexpected. Yeah, today's deep dive is all about turning those wait what moments into research gold. And trust me, it's way easier than you might think. We're diving headfirst into this fantastic financial review article by Itzhak Ben-David. He's got this system for finding groundbreaking research ideas, like just by paying attention to the world around us.
You know what really struck me about this article? It's how Ben-David emphasizes real-world observation as the foundation. And not just passively observing, but actively looking for those head-scratching moments where economic theory and actual human behavior just don't line up.
And you know what? He walks the walk. This isn't just some ivory tower theory. Ben-David actually credits his kid's babysitter with sparking one of his most groundbreaking research projects. I'm not even kidding. This is where it gets good. Picture this. It's 2005. The housing market is going bonkers. And his babysitter, who also happens to be a real estate agent, just casually mentions this bizarre trend she's seeing, home buyers going way over asking price, like ridiculously over, but then getting a big chunk of that money slipped back to them under the table at closing. Shady, right? Even Ben-David is like, hold up, this makes zero economic sense.
And that's the beauty of it. That, that's weird moment was like a giant flashing neon sign pointing him toward a research gold mine. Turns out this cashback scheme was part of a massive mortgage fraud operation. Buyers were inflating property values to dodge down payments.
I'm telling you, his babysitter was an accidental research assistant. But it totally drives home Ben-David's point. Sometimes the most mind-blowing research questions aren't found in dusty journals. They're hiding in plain sight. We just have to train ourselves to actually see them.
And that's key. Ben-David doesn't just leave you hanging with a go forth and observe message. He lays out this really practical system for evaluating those initial sparks of inspiration, figuring out which aha moments are actually worth chasing down the rabbit hole.
Okay, because not every intriguing anecdote is a research paper waiting to happen, right?
Yeah.
So how do you avoid getting sidetracked by a research dead end? Tell me Ben-David has a secret weapon for this.
Oh, he totally does. And it's deceptively simple.
Yeah.
But so clever. He calls it the imaginary abstract test.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
So imagine this. You stumble across something that sparks your curiosity. Maybe it's a weird statistic you see online. Maybe it's something your Uber driver says that just makes you go, The imaginary abstract test says before you do anything else, try to write the abstract for the dream paper that would come out of this idea.
So, I'm envisioning the final product before I've even started collecting data. That's kind of brilliant, actually.
It's all about forcing yourself to crystallize the essence of your idea early on. Can you clearly articulate the core puzzle or tension you're trying to address? What kind of data would you ideally need to test this? And most importantly, why would anyone care about the results?
You know what? I'm already seeing how this could be a huge time saver. Because if you can't even sketch out a compelling abstract that captures the heart of your idea, then it's probably not worth investing months of your life in.
Exactly. And that's a win in itself. Ben-David's all about avoiding those research rabbit holes that lead to nowhere. He wants you to be able to quickly assess an idea's potential and move on if it's not panning out.
So we've got real-world observation as our starting point, plus this genius imaginary abstract trick to weed out the duds. But what about all the existing research out there? Surely diving into the latest studies is crucial for finding new research avenues, right?
It seems intuitive, but you'd be surprised. Ben-David actually cautions against relying too heavily on existing literature as your primary source of inspiration. And here's why. It's like, if everyone's already knee-deep in research papers, where's the room for your fresh perspective? Exactly. Ben-David calls it falling into the trap of incremental thinking. You start by looking at what everyone else is saying, and you end up just kind of tweaking the edges of existing ideas instead of uncovering something truly groundbreaking.
Okay, so instead of asking, what are other researchers saying about X, I should be asking, what's missing from the conversation about X, especially when you compare it to what's actually happening in the real world.
Now you're catching on. And get this, Ben-David actually has a perfect example from his own research journey. Remember those massive corporate scandals back in the early 2000s?
Yeah.
Like Enron and WorldCom?
Oh, yeah, those were huge. Suddenly, everyone was talking about corporate governance.
Precisely. And at first, Ben-David thought, perfect, I'll write about corporate governance. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Hot topic, tons of research coming out.
Sounds like the ideal research landscape.
You'd think so. But he hit a wall. He spent weeks digging through all the latest papers, and nothing clicked. He just couldn't find an angle that felt fresh. It was all just more of the same.
Like everyone was writing the same paper, just with slightly different footnotes.
Exactly. It wasn't until he shifted his focus away from the literature and started looking for gaps in its explanation of real-world behavior that he finally had his breakthrough. He actually ended up writing about something completely different, mutual fund managers, and it became one of his most influential papers.
Okay, so sometimes the most groundbreaking research comes from ignoring the crowd. That's kind of reassuring, actually. But how do you even begin to visualize where those research gaps are?
This is where things get really interesting. Ben-David uses this analogy of a vector space to explain where truly impactful research ideas come from. Imagine a space where one point represents reality. You know how things actually work in the messy, complicated world. And another point represents the current literature, our best attempt so far at explaining it.
And the further apart those 2 points are,
the bigger the opportunity for truly innovative research. Our job as researchers is to identify those gaps, those places where our theoretical models don't quite line up with what's actually going on, and then use our research to build bridges between them.
So instead of getting lost in the weeds of what everyone ILSE is saying, we should always be looking for those discrepancies, those moments where the map doesn't match the territory. That's where the real magic happens.
Precisely. It's about challenging assumptions and pushing the boundaries of what we think we know. Now, speaking of things that don't always match up with expectations, let's talk about data.
Okay, yeah. Data sets. I feel like everyone assumes having access to some massive, unique data set is like winning the research lottery. But something tells me Ben-David has a different take on this. You know me. Always eager to hear a good myth-busting. So is a killer data set the research holy grail, or what?
It's so tempting to think so, right? But Ben-David would say, hold your horses. He's actually got this great line about becoming enamored with a cool data set without first having a crystal clear research question. He calls it putting the cart before the horse.
It's like buying a top-of-the-line sports car when you don't even have a driver's license or a destination in mind.
Perfect analogy. Ben-David's point is that without a laser-focused research question, driven by that real-world tension we talked about, that disconnect between theory and what you're actually observing, even the most impressive data set is just a bunch of numbers.
So it's not about finding the shiniest data set. It's about having that aha moment first, and then figuring out what kind of data can help you test it.
Exactly. And to illustrate this whole rapid evaluation process in action, Ben-David actually walks us through a fascinating near miss from his own research journey. And this one involves a little scandal you might remember, the whole Wells Fargo fiasco back in 2016.
Oh, yeah, where Wells Fargo employees were opening millions of fake accounts to meet those crazy sales goals. What a mess.
Total mess. But Ben-David sees a potential research goldmine. He's thinking, what if this could be a natural experiment to study the impact of, say, unsolicited credit on people's financial well-being?
Wait, hold on. How does he even connect those dots? That's some next-level thinking right there.
Right. But it's classic Ben-David. He's taking a real-world event that everyone else is just gawking at and seeing a unique research opportunity. All those unauthorized credit cards, they essentially represent this sudden exogenous increase in credit availability for a huge chunk of the population.
Yeah, I'm starting to see where he's going with this. It's like those people just won the credit card lottery. Except they didn't even buy a ticket.
Exactly. So he starts sketching out his imaginary abstract. What's the core tension he wants to explore? On the one hand, having access to credit can be empowering.
Right.
Especially for people who might be struggling to make ends meet.
It can be that buffer that helps you through a tough time. Or even the leg up you need to invest in your future.
Totally. But then there's the flip side. What if that extra credit actually backfires?
Yeah.
What if it just leads to more debt and financial stress down the line?
The classic too much of a good thing dilemma. I'm hooked. So how does he actually test this? What's his dream scenario for collecting data?
He's thinking ideally you'd want to compare the financial outcomes of people who got hit with those fake Wells Fargo accounts to a control group of similar individuals who weren't caught up in the scandal.
So, like, did the folks with those unauthorized credit lines end up using them? And if so, what was the long-term impact on their credit scores, their debt levels, all of that?
You got it. Ben-David even walks us through his dream results. Maybe people initially use the extra credit for seemingly positive things, like a down payment on a car or home repairs, things they wouldn't have been able to afford otherwise. But then you zoom out a year or two later, and they're drowning in high-interest debt. That would be a pretty compelling finding.
Talk about turning a corporate scandal into groundbreaking research. But here's the thing. It's all based on this imaginary abstract right. So how does Ben-David decide if it's even worth pursuing?
This is where he introduces the idea of necessary conditions. Before investing tons of time and energy, he steps back and asks himself, okay, what needs to be true in the real world for this research idea to even be feasible?
So in the Wells Fargo case, a necessary condition might be evidence that there was a noticeable spike in credit card accounts being opened in areas with a high concentration of Wells Fargo branches during that specific period.
Exactly. It's like if that initial spike in credit card issuance isn't there, then the whole premise of the study falls apart. And guess what? When Ben-David dug into the data, that initial spike, nowhere to be found.
Oh no. All that brainstorming, the imaginary abstract, the potential for a groundbreaking paper, all down the drain.
Not necessarily. Remember, the whole point of this rapid evaluation system is to avoid wasting months, maybe even years of your life chasing a dead end. Ben-David actually sees it as a victory, that he's able to figure this out relatively quickly and move on.
So it's like that saying, fail fast, fail forward. It's better to abandon a flawed premise early on than to realize you're barking up the wrong tree a year into your research.
Exactly. And this is where Ben-David's concept of idea abundance comes in. He argues that early career researchers especially can get so fixated on a single idea that they're terrified of letting it go, even when the evidence suggests it's a dead end.
Which is understandable. You get emotionally invested, you've poured your heart and soul into this research idea. It feels like starting over is admitting defeat.
And that's exactly the mindset Ben-David wants to challenge. He believes that the more ideas you're exposed to, and the more comfortable you become with that whole rapid evaluation process, the less scary it is to abandon the ones that aren't working.
He even suggests using RSS readers as a tool for cultivating this idea abundance. What's his thinking there?
He calls it constructive destruction. Basically, you curate this diverse feed of information, blogs, newsletters, articles from a wide range of fields, stuff you might not normally come across in your day-to-day research.
So it's like cross-training for your brain. You're constantly exposing yourself to new perspectives, new ways of thinking, and that makes it easier to let go of ideas that aren't serving you anymore.
Exactly. And who knows? That random article on beekeeping might spark your next research breakthrough. You just never know where inspiration will strike.
This whole deep dive has been one big aha moment for me. Ben-David's approach to research is so refreshing. It's all about being observant, being willing to challenge assumptions, and most importantly, not being afraid to let go of ideas that aren't panning out.
I couldn't agree more. It's a great reminder that research doesn't have to be this rigid, intimidating process, confined to libraries and labs. It can start with something as simple as a conversation with your kid's babysitter, a weird statistic you stumble across online, or even just a nagging feeling that something doesn't quite add up.
So for anyone listening who's feeling stuck or uninspired, remember Ben-David's message. Open your eyes, embrace those "that's weird" moments, and don't be afraid to let go of ideas that aren't sparking joy, or at least a really compelling imaginary abstract.
You never know. That next research breakthrough might be right around the corner.
And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, happy researching.